Good morning. Okay. Excellent. I'm doing excellent. How are you?
Excellent, thank you.
All right. So, Cyrus, tell me about your experience with cannabis.
That's a question that goes back quite a while. I started at Canopy in 2017, leaving alcohol, beverage, and packaged goods. And I've been brought to Canopy to lead our sales strategy group. So essentially that's made up of 5 distinct verticals. So we look at strategic analytics and forecasting. We look at revenue management, which is all about our pricing strategy and protecting our margin pool and growing that pool. We look at category management, trade marketing, which is about bringing our brands to life in store, and sales operations, which is really about closing that ecosystem where we start from data and we end with operations out to the field sales team.
Category management was something I had to Google to prepare for this interview. So it was really fascinating because in the conversations we've had, I've learned so much about cannabis as a category and really how much is left to be defined.
Absolutely. I think traditional category management is about that linkage between the vendor and the customer and making brands, products come to life at retail or at the point of connection with the consumer. And part of our discussion was really about how the cannabis industry or the cannabis category is not perfectly defined anywhere. Even more mature markets in the US don't have a perfect definition for how the category is structured. A perfect example of that in Canada is this not perfect understanding of the consumer decision tree. So how consumers enter a retail or online environment and what are the series of decisions they're making in their mind before converting to a purchase.
So right now they're making decisions from a place of generally lack of knowledge and lack of understanding. So how are you influencing those decisions from Canopy's perspective? What's important for you when you connect with consumers? And then you mentioned online retail. And tell me about your strategy and how that varies between online and brick and mortar.
So I'll talk about online versus brick and mortar first, which was really interesting when we were doing our first set of modeling for industry and market sizing. We'd originally pegged e-com to be closer to 20 to 30%, depending on the individual market. But what we're actually seeing today in Canada is e-com's trending at less than 5% in some markets and even less than 2% in other markets. And that has a very big implication on your route to market and brand development. The role of brick and mortar is incredibly important in Canada today. And the idea or the notion behind that is education and interfacing with a bud tender or somebody who can talk to you about the category. A large part of the opportunity in Canada is this segment of consumers who want to consume cannabis but don't understand how to. So using education as a currency, we're able to help people enter the category in a smart and safe way.
I always think of cannabis as, I always think of cannabis as a migration of a market as opposed to the formation of a brand new market. But you mentioned that there's a lot of folks out there that are curious that haven't necessarily used cannabis illicitly or in the illicit market. So when you reach out to them, tell me about like the profiles that you create. You know, who are those consumers? Help us understand who exactly are you marketing to?
Absolutely. I think we can't paint every consumer with the same brush, and our job number one is to convert an illicit consumer to a legal consumer, right? So understanding the consumer today, whether they shop in the illicit market or whether they shop in the legal market, is based on different consumer profiles. So what we've actually done is create our own custom segmentation to understand the cannabis consumer. And the cannabis consumer is unique and they are not the same and they don't fit one stereotype. So looking at different segments, 2 perfect examples are calm couples and a habitual homebody. A habitual homebody fits a stereotypical mold where it's a male above the age of 35, likes to consume cannabis on their own in the evening while watching television and consuming food. That's probably your most stereotypical lens to a consumer. Now, flip that dynamic to a consumer segment that we call calm couples. Calm couples are 2 partners who like to enjoy cannabis together. They do it privately. They don't like to talk about it amongst their social network, but it's something that they do in the evening, and they choose it as an alternative to alcohol beverage. So appealing to these groups, as you can see, like those are 2 very far groups that are apart. You have to have the portfolio strategy, the product strategy, the route to market to actually be able to affect a desire to consume cannabis or a desire to actually choose your brand versus just trying to paint all consumers with the same brush.
Now, all of your work right now focused in Canada is around flower and tinctures. So you just touched on a couple of categories of individuals that you're marketing to, but surely you're thinking ahead to the end of the year and the categories of products, the form factors that you want to bring to market. So what stands out in your strategy? Why don't you just go ahead and tell us Canopy Growth sales strategy,
Absolutely.
product rollout strategy. All right, go ahead.
So I think the interesting thing is if you start from what's available today. So in the legal framework or in the legal market today, we're only participating in a handful of the categories. So we're not fully competing today with the illicit market, only with a portion of that market. So today we're selling dry flower, we're selling oil, soft gel capsules, pre-rolled joints, and seeds. That's what's legal today. The form factors that are going to be legalized, what we suspect later this year in October, November, includes vapes, edibles in multiple forms, so whether that be chocolate, gummies, and so forth, as well as beverages and concentrates. So these now create a new dynamic where you're actually, what I would say, fully competing with the illicit market, and thereby that opens up a lot of opportunity in a lot of different ways to convert that illicit supply chain to a legal one.
So about that conversion, it's not happening as quickly in Canada as we'd like to see. Why do you think that is?
I think there's a million reasons why that is. I think if you go back and look at, there was a comment earlier about the distribution network not being great. It's true. We're starting an industry from scratch, essentially, building brick and mortar retail stores, building appropriate networks, building distribution capability, and working with the government to actually license and create these models is not something that'll happen overnight. I wouldn't say that the excitement from the industry is gone. I think quite the opposite. I think the excitement's still there, and I think the flood or the wave of innovation that's going to come in October, November is going to further drive that excitement into the industry. So I think a lot of what you're seeing, if you look at the data from BDS in California, for example, we know that vapes, disposable or cartridge-based vapes, are worth over 30% of the category. So when you're talking about consumers that may not be super excited about the market today because they're purchasing on the illicit market, bringing these new form factors, again, is really a large pool of opportunity in understanding on how to convert that consumer. So I think a lot of the excitement factor and a lot of the challenges that we've had to date as an industry from a supply capability in building something, a lot of that will be helped or at least aided with the rollout of innovation later this year.
Okay, so as you're going out to marketplaces and you're looking at data from BDS Analytics from California and elsewhere, you're looking at lag data, right? Things that have already occurred. But there's also, I learned in our conversation that there's lead data, and there's really trying to qualitatively figure out what's happening in the store. So I think it'd be really interesting for our audience to talk a little bit about the difference and what is most important to you and what you're paying attention to.
Yeah, absolutely. So the really interesting thing is a lot of people love to look at lag measures, and for me, you're already behind the game if that's what you're...
What are some lag measures?
Volume, profit, share, distribution. Like those are already measures on things that you cannot affect. You need to go and examine the results and understand what happened that drove you to that result. We're taking a slightly different approach because of the variability and complexity in the industry and based on the idea that nothing is fixed today. So we're not trying to change something, we're trying to build something. Measuring and understanding lead measures actually gives us a really strong indicator to predict where we'll land. So the idea is to look specifically at lead measures, and a really basic example of that is if you had a sales rep who executed a survey through their CRM, like Salesforce, in a dispensary in Canada, and part of that survey talked about the placement of your brands, what brands were available in a store, how many SKUs were available, in stock position, price index to a competitor. If you know all of that information, you can start to predict your lag outcomes. So what we're actually doing is using a model where we begin to correlate our lead measures, and we have many different ways of getting at those, either outlet specific or through various studies, that we can then start to predict and model our lag output measures and thereby affect them before those measures take hold. So it's, I mean, you're looking at an idea of predictive analytics or predictive results, but the idea is to focus on the lead versus the lag, because the lag in this industry is happening so fast that to go back and try and understand something well after it's happened, you'll be behind the 8 ball.
All right, so let's take the lead, or certainly Canopy wants to take the lead in new product categories that are rolled out in Canada. You mentioned vapes already, 30% of the market in California, according to BDS Analytics. And we also talk about your background, which is alcohol and beverage. So clearly there's a lot of interest in beverages, cannabis-infused beverages. Tell me a little bit about your perspective on those products that are coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, I think the beverage space is going to be something that I'm most excited about launching in Canada. And if you look at the data from the US, you'll see that beverages account for something like 1% of the total market. I think what you'll see in Canada is something entirely different. And the reason I say that is because the beverages that'll be launched in Canada will be launched under a legal framework. They'll be launched by major corporations like Molson Coors, like Canopy Growth, like Labatt ABI, are all playing in this space, and they are all aggressive, heavy hitters who are able to develop great beverages. I think the question is, how will these be differentiated from what's in the US market today? And there's a ton of IP and there's a ton of work being done to create a product that is wholly different than the type of products that you see in the US today, which are essentially extremely high THC beverages that don't necessarily all have great beverage credentials, right? They're intended for a very specific consumer segment, which is, you know, get as much THC as in you as quickly as possible. And we don't think that's the smart approach for Canada, and having the ability to introduce beverages in a different way to appeal to consumers who may not necessarily enjoy consuming cannabis today, but are looking for an alternative to alcohol beverage, which is 0 calorie, doesn't affect your liver, and no hangover. Like, these are all very compelling points that would help new users or people who intend to participate in the category join through the beverage stream.
So you raise the issue in the rollout of beverages of consistency, and I know what I'm going to get when I crack open a Stella or any other beverage that's you know, alcohol based. With cannabis derived or cannabis infused beverages, there's that variability, and really with all cannabis products across multiple form factors, there's just so much unknown for the consumer. How do you think that'll be addressed?
I think the variability that you probably see today is based on flower. So variability in what I call the value add products like soft gel capsules, vapes, drinks. The whole appeal, or one of the biggest appeals of these form factors, is that variability won't exist. So we're going to make consumer products that are consistent, that flow under a consistent brand, and are not necessarily or are not an agricultural product. Think about it as today we're selling tomatoes, and tomorrow we're going to be selling ketchup and salsa. So the tomato or the cannabis plant becomes a critical component and a critical molecule as an input component, but we're not in a space where we are selling a live plant or a harvested plant. So that variability actually goes away, and that's a huge, huge deal commercially, because for the first time, it allows you to start building products, brands, sales strategies that are based on a product that you know day in, day out will be exactly the same. So you can create that consumer experience and appeal to those consumer segments, whereas before it's a lot more difficult to do with a variable product like cannabis.
All right, so as we see product categories, you're bullish on alcohol, or excuse me, on beverages, vapes. I think, you know, we see in other markets there's a reason to believe to be bullish there. Tell me a little bit about your strategy for launching new brands and connecting with consumers, and how the data that you're evaluating and what you're seeing in the marketplace helps inform those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first thing you need to look at is your total portfolio strategy. So we talked about there being a multitude of different types of cannabis consumers and some segments that aren't defined because those products haven't been created. They're going to be new to world. So the idea for us is to map out the entire portfolio and understand and ensure that each brand, each product, each SKU is meeting a consumer need, whether that be in a cannabinoid factor in THC or CBD, whether that be in a phenotype, whether that be in a price point, a pack size, or a format. But you could essentially plot everything in your portfolio and make sure that, number one, it's in line with your commercial strategy, but number two, that you're not missing any sizes of the prize that are out there. So you quite simply use the data, either point of sale, US data, consumer data, and you can quite easily or quite quickly begin to model where you should be fishing and ensure that you're fishing there in a very strong way. So that's one of the ways that we help build out and inform the portfolio strategy and how we launch brands.
Okay, so actionable insights. In your role, you see a ton of information and you have to process that. And I think you told me you had a 20-person team that helps you evaluate and analyze the information that you're able to pull from the marketplace. I would love to hear anything that we have in the last minute that we have, anything that I haven't touched on or that escaped our conversation that you feel is an actionable insight for the investors and for the operators in this room. You're at a perch where you have tons of information, so we'd love for you to share a little bit of it with it right now.
Thank you. I think one of the things that was really interesting aha for us is understanding the consumer preference for cannabinoid form factor. So between THC and pure CBD, there's a continuum or a spectrum, and you're understanding what's appealing to different consumer groups. And it's fascinating to see in the data what consumers in the rec market versus the medical market versus the illicit market, where they quite frankly don't completely understand what they're getting, appeals to consumers. So, for example, in Canada, what we're seeing as the most popular types of products when talking about dry flower is obviously really high THC products, but there's also this really large second segment, which is for balanced products. So for example, a product that has an equal weighting of THC to CBD, whether that comes in an oil, a soft gel, or flower, is really starting to give us glimpses as to what the pure CBD market's going to look like. And anecdotally speaking to outlet level staff, you begin to understand that the need or the desire for CBD is incredibly high. So you're crossing this pseudo space between medical and recreational needs or uses for CBD, but it's quickly becoming the very large second subsegment to high THC in the rec market. So understanding what you do with that as you launch your CBD products is critically important in my mind.
Excellent. All right, everybody, thank you very much, Cyrus. Appreciate your time.